On today's show, we'll tackle the Atlanta Hawks getting over 500 for the first time since December. Yes, December. The Hawks go on the road to Indiana and win in wire-to-wire fashion over a very undermanned Pacers team, taking care of business, doing what they had to do. And again, one more time, over 500 for the first time since December at 38-37. We'll touch on all of what transpired in the game coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1206 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Monday evening. And today's podcast was brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. And also, thank you for making this podcast, Locked On Hawks podcast, your first listen each and every day. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on YouTube. If you like the video side of things, we can be watching me right now on that platform. Today's podcast, we'll get into what became a 132-123 win over the Indiana Pacers on the road for the Hawks. The headliner being that the Hawks are now over 500 for the first time since mid-December. The Hawks were 13-12 last time they were over 500, and now they are 38-37. It's been a long, long ride. In fact, they had 5 chances before this when they were at 500 and went 0-5, and finally broke that streak tonight with a win that they were supposed to get in a lot of ways. We'll get into all of the context of why that happened. But at the end of the day, the Hawks have had some wins this year that they could have potentially gotten and they didn't get. In this one, they held serve. They were up 11 at the half. They had this explosion offensively in the first quarter that kind of set the tone in this one. And it wasn't always dominant after halftime. In fact, the Hawks lost the second half of this game. But at the same time, they were able to hold on, never got too tight down the stretch. And we'll get into all of what transpired on the show. So coming into the game, it is worth reporting and also emphasizing, noting, et cetera, that the Pacers are not very good. And this game has to be evaluated, at least in my mind, through the professional lens or the objective lens, however you want to say it, through that. Because the Pacers coming into the night were 25-50, which is obviously quite bad on its own, but also 13-34 in the last 47 games. They lost the previous 2 games by a combined 70 points. Yes, 70 points. The Pacers also had tons of injuries in this one. The Hawks, by the way, sweep the Pacers this season 4-0. A blowout win in February, a couple wins. Recently, they were kind of close-ish. In fact, there was a game in March a couple weeks ago with the Hawks were pretty much challenged by the undermanned Pacers. But Indiana only had 9 guys available in this game. And really, of the roster players that were out there for the Pacers, only 2 guys are definitely even rotation caliber players in the NBA. Tyrese Haliburton and Buddy Hield. Obviously, the Hawks had some injuries too that we'll talk about, but no Malcolm Brogdon, Miles Turner, Chris Duarte, T.J. Warren, Isaiah Jackson, et cetera, for Indiana. With that said, the Hawks were also banged up, and that was kind of one of the headliners coming into the night, was that the Hawks were already listing Bogdanović and Gallinari as questionable. Bogdanović with right knee soreness, Gallinari with right elbow contusion that he suffered the other day on Friday night in a loss in the win. But Gallinari was ruled out pregame. Bogdanović ended up playing in this one and obviously playing extremely well, which we'll talk about later on. But then there was a surprise scratch of DeAndre Hunter about 40 minutes before tip-off. It was pretty close after the pregame, after the Hawks released their quote-unquote final injury report. But Hunter tried to warm up. I think Millen said that he just didn't have it, basically. Just had something going on with the knee, some pain, some soreness, what was going on there. And he was actually asked, McMillan was about sort of his status for the next game against Oklahoma City, and didn't really give any kind of update beyond that. But Hunter was supposed to play. He wasn't on the injury report at all. And that left the Hawks shorthanded. Obviously, John Collins still remains out. So basically, the Hawks are missing their top 3 guys in terms of minutes at the power forward spot this year. Their top 3 forwards coming into the season overall. And kind of interesting situation because I just talked about how bad Indiana is on paper. The Hawks, of course, have been bad on the road this season. Coming into the night, the Hawks were 13-23 on the road this season. And, of course, missing 3 of their top, 8 players. So the Hawks being favored in this game at all is pretty crazy when you kind of look what was going on with their own roster. But then you factor in Indiana. And honestly, the pregame betting line was an indictment of the Pacers. Ended up being correct, by the way, which I'm not saying otherwise. But the Hawks were 7.5-point favorites, according to BetOnline, in this game. Again, missing 3 of their top 8 guys on the road with a 13-23 road record. And the Hawks, by the way, covered, although narrowly down the stretch of this one. So that's a lot of a preamble, but I want to give you the setup in this game. The Hawks had this awesome start, which I referenced earlier. They ended up starting DeLon Wright and TLC alongside Young, Huerter, and Capela. That allowed them to have Bogdanovich in his usual role off the bench, which ended up working out very well because he was awesome in this game. The Pacers, if you watched the game a couple weeks ago, Trae Young had 33 points in the first half against the Pacers 2 weeks ago. And at halftime in that game, Indiana elected to change their defense and basically start blitzing him as hard as anyone has been blitzed in the NBA in a long time. It's kind of a college defense in a lot of ways. Kevin Huerter, by the way, in a walk-off interview at the halftime break tonight, called it kind of a junk defense by Indiana. And it's not necessarily the wrong decision by the Pacers, but you rarely see this. They really were sort of pulling out all the stops to make sure Trae wasn't going to beat them as a scorer in this game. And he didn't, but he was fantastic overall, which we'll touch on. He had 16 assists, a season high for Trae in this one. But the Hawks got a good start, a 12-3 early run to go up by 7 points. Capela had 6 rebounds in the first 4 minutes. Trae had a bunch of assists. Capela actually had 2 nice passes as well, a nice pass on a short roll for an assist. Huerter and TLC were both hot in the early going. They made their first 5 threes combined. They both shot the ball well, as Bogdanovich in this game. A lot of hot shooting from the wings from Atlanta. And then later in the first quarter, the Hawks had a 16-3 run to go up by 15 points late in the period. There was about a 60-foot lob by Trae Young to Jalen Johnson for a pretty impressive dunk. And here's the crazy thing. The Hawks opened this game 11 of 15 from 3. One more time, 11 of 15 from 3. Not from the field, from the 3. And given that they were already the better team, more talented team, and more inspired and motivated team, looking for the playoff spot, all that stuff, that is a pretty impressive and pretty kind of a daunting start for the Pacers to overcome. I will say, though, throughout this game, defensively, the Hawks were not very good. Atlanta allowed 24 points on their first 19 possessions to the Pacers, and the Hawks were only up by 2, pretty much through 8 minutes of the game, even with the offense really, really cooking. Now, they had that late run, but just kind of noteworthy that the Hawks had trouble getting stops the entire way through. Rotationally, it was what you would have projected in this game, was what I projected before the game started. It was a 9-man rotation for Atlanta. The starters, which, by the way, again, included TLC and DeLon Wright, and then it was Bogdanovich, Lou Williams, Jalen Johnson as backup power forward, and then Okongwu as backup center, and that was the 9-man group the entire game in this one. The Hawks led by 14 points at the end of the first quarter. They shot 68% from the floor, including 10 threes. That's a season high for threes in any quarter. They hit 10 in a quarter, by the way, just franchise record, I believe, is 11 or 12 in a quarter. So pretty impressive stuff there. Also a season high for points in a first quarter with 44 for the Hawks. So that's pretty impressive. Again, it is worth noting that this Pacers team, as constructed, is probably the worst defensive team in the league, because just without going through all of this, their 2 best players available right now are Halliburton and Hield, both of whom are bad defenders right now. I know Halliburton's kind of a skilled guy, but Hield's a bad defender. Halliburton's pretty weak at the point of attack. So not a huge surprise. The Hawks got a lot of points in this one, but still they were able to make a ton of shots. Had 13 assists in the first quarter. Trae played the entire first quarter and had 8 assists in the opening period. He was fantastic again. Jalen Johnson, though, was kind of one of the bigger stories in this one, just because he was playing, number one, but also playing well. We'll touch on sort of his overarching impact later on, but he had 5 dunks in this game. Had 4 dunks in the first 70 seconds of the second quarter. The first 3 were sort of assisted dunks. There was a 1 lob by Trae, etc. But the 4th dunk that he had was actually a pick 6 that he got a nice steal on, good anticipation, and was sort of went end to end there. I thought he had a good stint overall in the first half. A couple of defensive things to pick on for sure if you wanted to, sort of off the ball stuff, but his activity was really good in this game. I thought he played better in this one than he did on Friday. There was a lot of attention, not Friday, that he did in Detroit last week. But there's a lot of attention on that game. I thought he was better in this one overall, both on offense and defense. But the Hawks were hot from the floor still. They made 9 straight shots, dating back to the first quarter to go up by 18 points. That was the largest lead of the entire game, actually. It was early in the second quarter. And the Hawks at that point were shooting 70% from the floor. So there you go. Indiana had a nice little run later on in the period to go to kind of cut in the lead a little bit. And the Hawks ended up losing the second quarter. It's actually funny. The Hawks were up 44-30 at the end of the first quarter and quote-unquote lost the rest of the game. They only lost 2 of the 3 quarters, but still they were the worst team and at least on the scoreboard down the stretch of this one. But it didn't really matter that much because of the offensive barrage at the outset. In the first half, before we get to the second half stuff, the Hawks had a 143 offensive rating. They shot 56% from the floor, had 12 threes. They had 20 assists in the first period. That is a remarkably high number. Only the 4th time all year they've had 20 assists in any half of a game. Trae had 10 of his own. Capela had a double-double in the first half. And the wing trio of Huerter, Bogdanovich, and TLC combined to make 9 threes before halftime. So that's pretty prolific. Defensively, it was not great, which we'll come back to, but a 124 defensive rating against a bad team in the first half. The Hawks did win the glass on both ends of the floor the entire game, as well as in the first half, but it was not exactly the most comfortable advantage for a team that scored 74 points in the first half, just because of the defensive end of the floor. Indiana scored at least 27 points in every quarter, and that's not what you want to see if you're Nate McMillan. So it's one of those working kind of victories where you can get a lot done in terms of instruction stuff and also be positive about a victory. So we'll get into all of what transpired in the second half of this game, as well as some look ahead stuff to the rest of the season, as well as the standings, etc. But first, a word from our sponsors on the podcast. This year, one of my resolutions was to actually eat right, and I managed to stick to that with the help of Built Bar. In some ways, it's not even really a resolution for me anymore because I actually enjoy eating Built Bars. They have the protein-infused puff bars that are fantastic, all the other bars, and the fan favorites from Built Bar. They're all very, very good, and each and every bar has 100% real chocolate around the outside, which makes it a huge difference, and they taste fantastic. On top of the taste, Built Bars have low calorie and high protein. You can easily replace your candy bars with Built Bars, both in taste and to improve nutrition overall. Built.com has all the information that you possibly could need on the nutrition side. You'll be blown away by all. And honestly, just as an example, most bars have only 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein with a low calorie count. Built Bar also has longtime flavors like coconut almond and others, and also new flavors coming all the time. Plus, all of them are delicious. Best way to find out about Built Bars is go to Built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15 when you get there. If you do that, 15% off on your order with Built Bar. That is promo code LOCKED15, 15% off at Built.com. Okay, we'll dive in now to the second half of this one. And it got a little bit dicey in a hurry. In fact, it was never particularly comfortable in the second half. Now, it was never particularly threatening either, but it was not a blowout at any point. The Pacers were within 7 points pretty fast in the third quarter. And they had some offensive flourishes, the Hawks did, but nothing like the first half. They definitely missed a lot more shots. They only scored 20 points in the first 9 minutes of the second half. And it was a 6-point game at one point after Indiana made a 3 late in the third quarter. Some of that was that the Hawks just kind of stopped making threes. Now, they still shot the ball, decently well. After opening this game 11-15, the Hawks were only 6 of 20 the rest of the way, which is not terrible, 30%, but still not good. And a lot of that was that they missed 14 out of 17 after they had that hot start. They were still scoring kind of at will when they wanted to. Defensively, there were some nice moments. Jalen Johnson had a nice one possession against Taylor that ended up with a changing of the shot. It wasn't a block, but he held his ground defensively. That was good to see him in a one-on-one spot. Bogey had a play reviewed in which he kind of, I guess it was reviewed for a hostile act. He was actually the one that was fouled, but it was correctly not ruled a flagrant foul. That was kind of a weird review, especially because there was not one later on with Trae Young against Lance Stevenson. But the Hawks had a nice close to the third quarter to go back up by 12 after it got to 6. They ended up winning that quarter, actually, despite not playing super well, but again, not too comfortable along the way. The best stretch of the second half was this 12-2 run. So they had an 8-2 run at the end of the third, and then the first 4 points of the fourth quarter to go up by 16 points. So that went from basically up 6 to up 16, and it should have been over at that point. You could argue that it maybe was, but it wasn't like academic. Okongwu had a great steal and a nice one, sort of easy bucket in transition. It was a nice play by him. They were up by 15, 16 points for like the first 5 minutes of the fourth quarter. Jalen had another dunk, had a nice reverse layup. Indiana got it back to 13 with like 6 minutes to go, and that's when Trae, Capela, and Huerter came back into the game, which was kind of predictable. But Bogdanovich had been super, super hot at that point. In fact, he had 27 points on his first 14 shooting possessions, which is ridiculous. It's almost 2 points per shot, which is obviously a good ratio. It felt comfortable-ish, but India got it to 9 within like the first, minute after that. The Hawks missed 4 straight shots, had a turnover. It was a little bit shaky. Then there was the play with Trae getting tangled up with Lance Stevenson. That was kind of a dangerous play by Stevenson. I'm not the biggest fan of Lance, to be honest with you, for a lot of reasons, but that wasn't reviewed. Probably should have been. And Trae, fortunately, there was nothing bad that happened there. It was sort of a dangerous kind of play in the open floor, but no damage done. The dagger was probably when Huerter hit a 3 with like 3 minutes to go back up by 13. Got a little bit too interesting down the stretch. Trae had a pretty bad turnover to go lead to a sort of the league going down to 9 points, but it was still 9 or more for the final, 5, 6, 7 minutes. So it never got actually dicey, and then ended up with a 9-point final margin. So, it was not a wire-to-wire dominance from the Hawks. They were comfortable in the entire game. In fact, they led by at least 6 points, basically from the middle of the first quarter on. which is solid enough. As far as takeaways and some observations from this game are concerned overall, the offense was quite good. Now, even when you adjust for Indiana's bad defense, and it is bad, make no mistake, the Hawks had a 134 offensive rating in this one, and that is obviously comfortably good. 55% from the floor in the game, 17 of 35, which I mentioned before. It was basically a tale of the hot start and then kind of so-so shooting from there. They were better in the fourth quarter for sure. They got to the line a lot late. They had 26 free throw attempts. Bogey took 10 on his own. So they took 8 more free throws than the Pacers, which obviously helps your efficiency. They made 81% of them. That's obviously good. They were excellent on the offensive glass in this game. They got more than 40% of the available rebounds in this one off of missed shots. So the Hawks only missed 39 shots, and they had 14 offensive rebounds, something like that. So they were very, very good on the offensive glass in this one. Capela had 5, Bogey had 3, 2 for Okongwu, and then 1 each for Wright, TLC, and Kevin Huerter on the glass. Extra possessions are paramount. The Hawks ended up taking the same amount of shots. 1 less shot than the Pacers, but the Pacers also had 8 free throw attempts. So a good ratio there overall. 32 assists from Atlanta is an excellent figure. I will say, if you're trying to nitpick a little bit, it was the turnovers, 15 of those for the Hawks, which is not a terrible number, but the Hawks average only about 12 per game. So that's a little bit more than they usually would want to see. But it was a fast-paced game in some respects. And the Hawks, when you generate 32 assists, 15 turnovers is a lot more palatable. More than 2-1 is all you want to see there from Atlanta. But overall, it was a pretty much excellent offensive performance. There were a couple of little lulls for 3-4 minutes at a time, but the rest of the game, it was very, very good across the board, especially when you factor in the way that they accounted for Trae being blitzed and kind of making plays on the perimeter, and Capela and Okongwu finishing around the rim, Jalen Johnson finishing around the rim, etc. Defensively, it wasn't great, if we're being honest. I will say Indiana's personnel in this game was better on offense than defense. So if you're trying to give a little bit of credence there to them, they made their shots. Indiana did make 47% of their threes, which some of that's the Hawks defense. Some of that's just good shooting. Buddy Hield's a great shooter. Halliburton's a good shooter as well. So that's a little bit on Indiana. Credit to them for making shots. But they did shoot 52% from the floor and 55% on twos, which are pretty bad numbers for a Hawks team that's trying to play defense and trying to win a game against a bad opponent. Indiana didn't do a ton on the offensive glass, which is good for the Hawks. In fact, Atlanta got 76% of defensive rebounds. That's pretty good. Kind of elite level stuff there. And only 36 points in the paint for the Pacers. So there were positives for sure. And I think that if you were trying to be honest about whether the Hawks quote unquote earned a 128 defensive rating, I would probably say no to that. I think they were better than that overall, but it wasn't very good defensively. And I think the Hawks are lucky, maybe not super lucky, but somewhat fortunate, however you want to put that the offense was as good as it was, because, there were times when the defense was pretty frustratingly bad, particularly at times when Capela was not out there on the glass, etc. So, it was a perfect game by all means, but the Hawks did win and we're leading wire to wire. So you can't really complain. Look, I've said this all the time. It goes both ways. When the Hawks lose a game on the road, I will say this. When they win a game on the road, I'll say this. There's nothing assured on the road in the NBA. The Pacers are bad. No question about that. In their current form, this is one of the worst teams in the league, full stop. But you still had to go on the road and win a game. And the Pacers were trying. It was not like they were packing it in. So a nice little win here. And again, the headliner is going over 500 for the first time since December. So we'll touch on more of the game with some player observations, as well as a look ahead to the standings and what's coming up next for the Hawks. But first, a word from our sponsors on the podcast. NBA TopShot is the official licensed NFT of the NBA, and you can connect with a passionate community of NBA fans across the globe and build your collection with your favorite moments from NBA history. NBA TopShot is the future of what being an NBA fan looks like. It's part trading cards, part stock market, and also part fantasy sports with a built-in loyalty program. NBA TopShot has evolving trading cards and made it a lot easier to navigate them because you can buy, sell, and trade by removing the hassle of card grading, shoe boxes, and binders. And their 24/7 peer-to-peer marketplace lets you scroll through all of your favorite players and your favorite teams. Once you find something in the moments that you're looking for, buy it in just a couple of clicks. And honestly, I hear all the time that why you buy something when you can just watch on YouTube for free, and I get that. But I tell people all the time, it's not only about watching the highlights, but actually having ownership in the market of the NBA's greatest moments. And they have all you can access kind of unbuyable, once-in-a-lifetime experiences through NBA TopShot moments. Sign up for TopShot today, and the best way to do that is to get yourself a starter pack. If you do that, you can get a moment of a superstar like LeBron or KD or Trae Young if you're an Atlanta Hawks fan, or star rookies like Kate Cunningham, Evan Mobley, etc. for just $9 in that starter pack. Check it all out today and sign up at lockedon.nbatopshot.com. That's lockedon.nbatopshot.com. The auto world has so many makes and models these days, it's basically impossible for the local chain store to stock all the car or truck parts that you could possibly need for your automobile. And really, do you want to actually endure all the question for the person behind the counter who wants you to sell the brand their warehouse happens to carry behind that counter? Instead of doing that, rockauto.com is a much better option in your home, and there's access to it all across the world online at rockauto.com. Why spend more for the exact same auto parts for a chain store or dealership when you order them at rockauto.com? And rockauto.com is a family business, serving customers for more than 20 years at this point in time. And rockauto's prices are reliably low for each and every customer. They have everything that you possibly want for your car or your truck. That includes brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even carpet. And you can find it all in one place at rockauto.com today. See all the parts available for your car or your truck, and it's very searchable, very easy to use, and I definitely recommend it. From there, once you get to rockauto.com, write Locked On in the box that asks you how you heard about rockauto.com so they know that we sent you to them. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need, rockauto.com. All right, we'll dive into the player evaluation portion of the podcast now. If you're a new listener, what I do usually after these games is talk about each and every guy who's in the rotation on some level with some depth, some deeper stuff on some guys, etc., but try to give you some overview on how they played in the game. The bench was quite good for Atlanta, plus-minus wise, and also just effectiveness-wise overall. The quietest game was probably Blue Williams. He had 6 points in 15 minutes. Played a little bit with Trae, which I don't always love, to be honest, but had 4 rebounds, 2 assists, and a steal. It wasn't like he was bad. Didn't actually missed all 3 of his 2-point shots in this one, but got to the line for four attempts. Was totally fine overall in the game. Okongwu was pretty quiet as well. 5 points in 17 minutes, had 4 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, and a block, but did have some nice defensive plays. Again, had 4 fouls in 17 minutes. So him and Jalen Johnson were officiated like young guys, that's for sure, in this one. But I thought Okongwu was fine. It wasn't like he played poorly, but a little bit one of the quieter nights. I thought Jalen was good in this game. 12 points on 8 shots, a rebound, an assist, and a steal. Did have 3 turnovers, which is more than you would want for anyone, much less a guy playing 17 minutes. They had a block and a steal as well. Plus 16. I thought he was really active. McMillan kind of praised him. And I think the way that Nate put it after the game was that basically all they're asking him to do is bring energy, rebound, and just play. And I think that was kind of became evident in this one. They're not doing a ton with him on offense, like sophisticatedly. It's just one of those things where he is so athletic and energetic and active that he's doing a lot of the stuff that they need at the 4 right now on offense, just kind of filling lanes, being a great athlete above the rim, rolling hard to the rim, rebounding, etc. Defensively, there were some moments that you would pick on for sure from me, but I think in general he was more active, just kind of using his athleticism in this one, and also just a little bit less ball watching. I would say fewer breakdowns that I saw on tape in this one. It's not like he's perfect. People keep asking me that. I know they're not listening to the podcast every night, and that's totally okay. But if anybody's not heard me say this, the reason why he's not played more this year, you can certainly argue with this, and I think I would on some level, particularly with how much time Gallinari and Collins have missed, is that he's a rookie, and rookies are bad on defense, and I think McMillan values that more than most. So I think that certainly he should be playing on a night when Gallinari is not, and Collins is already out, and that was the case here. It would have been maddening if he didn't play in this game. I also didn't mind him not starting. He played 17 minutes. That's totally fine. He had some great moments in this one. I thought he played quite well. I'm encouraged by the way he has been playing recently. He is still raw at this point. It's important to also remember that he's not playing playing a ton of basketball. Like obviously his freshman season at Duke was kind of a lost season in a lot of ways. He's played a lot of minutes in the G League, but it's different in the NBA for sure when you're more of a role player than he's sort of the guy in some ways for College Park. So long story short, I kind of made note of this on Twitter, but if you missed it, I got a couple of people that just think I've been too hard on him, and that's okay. There was one that was particularly vulgar in their DM to me today about my Jalen stuff, but just as an overview and a refresher, I love the Jalen Johnson pick. I was very high on it as someone who covers the draft a ton. I had him as a lottery pick in last year's draft. I believe that he's still a lottery talent. That has not changed at all. I think he is still really, really impressive. I'm not like ranting and raving about him not playing a ton so far this season, like Hawks fans are, and I totally get why they are. But as far as this game is concerned, I thought Jalen was a nice bright spot. I thought he finished well around the rim. There was one like really under control play where he could have tried to dunk it and didn't. Ended up kind of being a very sort of, again, controlled pinpoint reverse layup that ended up going down. Had the 5 dunks as well. So lots of positives from the Hawks and from Jalen Johnson in this game. To the starters. Oh, sorry. To the pseudo starter in Bogdanovic, who I forgot. 29 points for Bogey to lead all scores in this one. He was fantastic. It's a little bit weird. He's been questionable for 3 or 4 games in a row here, and he's still been playing great. But I'm not sure what the health situation is, but he's making a lot of shots. 8 of 14 from the floor, 5-7 from 3, 8 of 10 at the free throw line. So he was efficient everywhere. He had 5 rebounds, no assists, which is okay. But he even kind of joked after the game, or maybe didn't joke after the game, that Trae being blitzed the way that he is creates a ton of open shots for Bogey, and that's definitely the case. I mean, we saw it in the playoffs a little bit as well, but this is the kind of the sort of antithesis of that. Like we saw Indiana's defense is just kind of crazy against Trae. So Bogey had all he could eat in this one. He made a bunch of shots and played very, very well. To the starters. The quieter ones were DeLon Wright and TLC, but not in a bad way. DeLon Wright had a DeLon Wright kind of game. 9 points, 3 steals, 2 blocks, 2 rebounds, an assist, and plus 5 in 31 minutes. Only took 7 shots, but made all 3 of his made 3 out of 4 from 2, 1 of 3 from 3. Did his job, did all the little things, played good defense. At least kind of bothered Halliburton at times, although he played well on offense. But I thought he was, once again, quite good for DeLon. He's a supporting piece for sure, but I was predicting him to play 30-plus minutes in this game. He did, and he earned them. TLC, I thought, played well, particularly in the first half. 13 points, 4 rebounds, 2 steals, and an assist. 3 of 6 from the floor, 2 of 4 from 3, 5 of 6 at the free throw line. I've kind of made this like a kind of a bit at this point almost, but I've long thought TLC has been underrated by Hawks fans. It does not mean that he should be playing a ton. It does not mean that he should be, the guy over Jalen Johnson. This is a separate discussion. I just think there's kind of this weird discussion about how bad, quote unquote, TLC is, and he's really not. He's totally fine. He played well in this game in the first half and gave them good minutes and 30 minutes across the board. We'll save Trae for the end because I thought his game was pretty interesting and pretty awesome. But Huerter was awesome in this game as well. 22 points and 6 assists with only 1 turnover. That's a great night from Kevin. He was 6 of 10 from 3. I love him taking 10 threes. I love him making 6 of them, obviously, but 2 of 3 on 2s. Really prolific, really good passing from Huerter, just being aggressive, hunting his shot. And if he makes 6 threes, then like good luck. Good luck trying to stop the Hawks if Huerter's making shots like that. Capela was really good as well. 22 points, 15 rebounds in 31 minutes. 3 assists as well. Some nice short roll passing from him. A couple of pretty funny sort of misses at the rim that he was able to rebound on his own, but still 11 of 17. You can't really argue with. That's 60+% from the field. So that's totally solid enough. And a big scoring game from Clint. And then finally, Trae Young. I think I tweeted that. I'm not sure what word I used, but I know I tweeted about this. I thought Trae was masterful in this game. I really did. And it's weird if you didn't watch the game to look at the box score and say, Trae had 14 points on 15 shooting possessions, which is like way below his scoring average, way below his efficiency numbers. He was only 2 of 9 on 3s, although he did make 2 of 4 from 2, 4 at the free throw line. But I thought he was under control the entire game. He had the 1 bad turnover in the final minute or so, but he only had 2 the entire game and 16 assists, which is a season high, an 8-to-1 assist turnover ratio from Trae. He took what the defense gave him in this game. And I know there's pros and cons to that. Like sometimes you have to have your guy, your star, take over as a scorer, but he didn't have to in this game. And I think he knew it the entire way. And also, this is not a small thing. I thought Trae was pretty good on defense in this one. Now, he's never going to be Gary Payton, but I thought that it's maybe not a coincidence in my mind because when he doesn't have to score a ton, he can use some energy on defense that he may not always use in defense. And I thought he was pretty scrappy, pretty active, had 2 steals, bunch of deflections. He was getting in the way. Now, granted, he's defending Kiefer Sykes, and that's a pretty easy matchup, or Lance or whatever. But still, I thought he played pretty well defensively in this game. So overall, it wasn't like it was the best game of his career or anything like that because he had 14 points on 15 shots. But I thought Trae was really, really good, which is not it's kind of impressive when you realize that he only had 14 points. But the passing was great, and defensively, he was much better than average in this spot, at least for his average, I should say. So from here, the Hawks go. Actually, last thing I want to say before I move on to look ahead, the standings are pretty tight for the Hawks right now, which is probably good given where they've been. The Hornets did beat the Nets on Sunday, which is a big result in some ways, but then Charlotte lost to Denver tonight. So at the moment, Monday evening, March 28th, the Hawks are a half game behind Charlotte and only 1 game behind Brooklyn for the 8th seed. Now, there was a moment in this and tonight when I was people were starting to dream about Cleveland because Cleveland was losing to Orlando and they have a bunch of injuries, but they're still 4 behind Cleveland. So I think the Hawks are still going to have to be in that 8, 9, 10 range somewhere. There was a chance at 7 if they had gotten the Cleveland result here, but down 4 with 7 to play, tough to ask that. I mean, it's not impossible, but let's just say it's not likely. Still, Also worth noting that we'll touch on that later on when we need to, but the Hawks actually have the 2-team tiebreaker over the Hornets right now. That could change in the future, but if they tie Charlotte, they'll have the advantage there. And clearly with the Hawks' struggles on the road this season, they would love to, even if they're in the 9-10, they'd love to be at home. No question about that. Obviously, you want to get 7-8 if you can. They give you 2 chances. But if you are in the 9-10, having that first game at home is not a small thing for this Hawks team, given their struggles away from Atlanta. With all that said, the Hawks' schedule is pretty solid the rest of the way. Now, next on the agenda is Wednesday at Oklahoma City, and then it's a back-to-back at home against Cleveland on Thursday. That's a pretty tough turnaround. Going from Oklahoma City an 8 o'clock start on Wednesday to a 7:30 tip on Thursday at home is tough. That's not a short drive. It's not a short flight at all from Oklahoma City. We'll touch on a little bit more on this in the future. But basically, there's 7 games left for the Hawks. I think there's sort of like 3 categories of games, which I tweeted about a little bit today. But they have 3 more games where the Hawks should, like flat out should win. And that is the Thunder on Wednesday. Then they play the Rockets at home. And then they play the they play the Wizards at home and the Rockets on the road in the final game of the season. And now Houston's got some talent, but they are not trying. And that's a game the Hawks, if they need to win it, should go out and be the better team. So that's 3 games where you cannot assume victory. I want to stress that. You cannot assume victory in the NBA ever. But those are games where the Hawks are going to be solid favorites, let's just say. Then they have 2 more that are like kind of coin flip games. That's Cleveland at home on a back-to-back, and then you have Brooklyn at home on Saturday. Now, Brooklyn is probably better than the Hawks on paper, but that's the Hawks. The Hawks are at home with regular rest, and that kind of levels the playing field in that one. Now, the Cleveland game, I think the Hawks are better than the Cavs right now. Cleveland's got a lot of injuries. They've been pretty ordinary for a long time, but that is a tough turnaround, and the home court definitely helps, but that'll be a game that's like within a 3-point point spread, I would imagine, either way. So kind of a coin flip game. Then they have 2 more games that are probably going to be underdog spots. They have to go to Toronto and they have to go to Miami. And those 2 games, they're winnable for sure for Atlanta. They can definitely win those games, but they will not be favored on the road in those 2 spots. So the projection systems are kind of all over the place right now. With the win tonight, I'm looking at 5:30 right now because it updates in real time. They're projected to have 43 wins for the Hawks. That means they'd have to end 5-2 the rest of the way, which, they might be favored in 5 games. I think 4-3, 5-2, something like that would be very reasonable for a projection for the Hawks right now. So all that said, like, it's crunch time. The Hawks only have 7 games remaining. The finale is next Sunday, so 13 days from now. A lot going on, but lots of different matchup stuff that's happened, and we can sort of talk about this later on the podcast when we get a little bit closer. But given the way that both Chicago and Cleveland are playing, if they get one of those teams, so here's the ideal scenario if you're the Hawks right now, I think realistically so. You play if you're in the 9-10, you want to get Charlotte and you want to play at home. That's my opinion. If that happens, you're probably playing the loser of Nets and Cavs or Nets and Bulls in the 7-8 game. You're rooting for that to not be the Nets. I would much rather play the Cavs or the Bulls. So I think if you're in the 9-10 as the Hawks right now, today, I'll sort of lay it down here. I think the easiest possible path, if you are in the 9-10 for the Hawks, would be to play Charlotte at home in the 9-10 and then play a road game against Cleveland or Chicago. There you go. That's very, very manageable for Atlanta, and obviously some optimism as a result. So that might change the next week and a half. We'll touch on all of that throughout the next 13 days, but that's sort of an overview right now. And again, the Hawks are back in action on Wednesday in OKC in a game where it'll be very similar to tonight in that the Hawks need to win that game. Oklahoma City is extremely injured and extremely bad and rebuilding and not trying to win, etc. I'll give you a quick look right now just before we get out of here. I know I'm going long, but that's okay. At the injuries that the Thunder have at the moment. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is now out for the season. That was announced tonight. He's their best player by a wide margin. So that tells you one thing about the way that Oklahoma City is going right now. But I'm looking at the rest of their injury report. Darius Bazley's out. Lou Dort is out. Derek Favors is out. Josh Giddey is out. Ty Jerome is out. Trey Mann is out. Kenneth Williams is out. And old friend Mike Muscala is out. So basically, I believe that's 10, maybe 9 or 10 of their guys that are like their top 14 probably are out. It's a road game. Nothing's assured, but that's one where the Hawks should win, and we'll see how they fare on Wednesday. I've said a lot on this podcast. Thank you for listening to the show as always. One plea at the end of the podcast, and I'll just be transparent. It would be awesome if you subscribe to the show on multiple platforms. If you enjoy the podcast and want to support me or just want to help the show or whatever you want to say about that, what I would say is the best way to do that is to subscribe on at least one audio platform, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, etc. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm doing this podcast on video for the last couple of weeks. Not always my favorite and best medium probably, but I'm doing my best on that. And it's very, very helpful, I'm told, by the higher ups if I get subscriptions and watch time on the YouTube channel as well. So do that just to support the podcast. If you're ever bored, just click around. Extra downloads are great. Extra clicks are great, etc. Also, tell your friends about the podcast. I know there are lots of Hawks fans that have never heard of the podcast or that have never heard of the podcast even. If they try the pod and don't like it, that's okay. I'm sure that's been happening at some point. But if they have never heard the podcast, I would implore you to help me out by sharing it with them. Give us a chance to spread the word a little bit on the show. Also, follow us on Twitter @LockedOnHawks. Follow me on Twitter @BT Rowland. And we'll see you later on in the week.